American history. Police still putting together all the evidence in the Sutherland Springs, Texas case. Devlin Patrick Kelly murdered 26 people, wounded at least another 20 at the First Baptist Church there. Good evening. Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. For the latest findings in that investigation, we're joined by Fox correspondent Matt Finn, who is in Texas for us tonight. Matt?
Tucker, we've learned the shooter himself had 3 gunshot wounds to his body, including one to his head, which the medical examiner says was self-inflicted. So the shooter killed himself after his deadly rampage here at this rural Texas church. We've also learned that the shooter recently purchased 4 guns. Authorities say all the sales were legal. There was no information in databases that would have flagged the shooter. And that aligns with 2 pieces of information we learned today. First, Academy Sporting Goods in San Antonio, Texas released a statement saying it sold 2 guns to the shooter, one in 2016 and one in 2017, and that the shooter passed the National Criminal Background Check, and that sporting goods store is now cooperating with law enforcement. Also, the U.S. Air Force did not submit the shooter's criminal records to the FBI as required by Pentagon law. This shooter was discharged from the Air Force for bad behavior for beating his wife and his stepson, intentionally cracking his stepson's skull. He was court-martialed and in prison. So had the Air Force turned that information over to the FBI, the shooter might not have been able to pass the background checks to purchase guns recently. The Air Force has launched a review into how the service handles the shooter's criminal records. And tonight, at this hour, there are still 15 people in the hospital with wounds related to yesterday's shooting. 5 of them are minors. Some are still in critical condition. Tucker, back to you.
What a gruesome and awful story. Matt, thank you very much. Matt Finn from Texas. Investigators were able to find a lot about the Sutherland Springs shooter, Devin Patrick Kelly, almost immediately. Why were they able to put the pieces together in this case so fast, while in Las Vegas, now a month old, we still know so little? For answers to that question and others, we turn now to NYPD officer and Secret Service agent Dan Bongino, who joins us live. So Dan, first to the Texas shooting. Apparently the Air Force did not, as you just heard Matt Finn report, enter this information about this man's court-martial and conviction and the year he spent in the brig into the criminal database that gun purchasers are run through. If they had put that information in there, would he have been prohibited from buying a gun?
Yeah, he would have been prohibited from buying a gun, Tucker, and this is why the radical left can't possibly win this gun control debate. I mean, Tucker, think about the argument they're making to us, right? The argument they're making to us is, oh, don't worry, government can protect you. Listen, I love our military. God bless every man and woman that serves, but this was clearly a bureaucratic error that cost people their lives by officials in our government. As they're making the very same argument, by the way, that we need new laws, despite the fact that the old laws didn't work because people in the government that are supposed to make new laws didn't cooperate with the laws we have now. And look at what we have on our hands. But yes, he would have been stopped from buying a gun, and he wasn't. And look what happened.
Right. And you see that with so many of our gun laws that are unenforced, including in the city of Chicago, where straw purchases are almost never prosecuted, even as they complain that they're a source of the problem, which they certainly are. Why do we know so much, and thank heaven we do, about this atrocity and still so little about the one that happened in Las Vegas more than a month ago?
Well, this tragedy here, this fits the models we have from my experience in the Secret Service of targeted violence, where you've seen indicators in the past. We're seeing, you and I have talked about the Vegas shooting on multiple appearances here, and we said it doesn't make any sense because where are all the witnesses? Where are all the people coming out saying, I saw something on Facebook that was strange. He said something at the local deli that was unusual. Where are they? The answer is nowhere. Nobody's found them yet, or they're there and we just don't know about them. But in this case, we're seeing a litany of people come out and say, oh, there were odd Facebook posts. There's obviously a pattern of violent behavior. And as I've said repeatedly, when you look at models of targeted violence, Tucker, there's always a trail, always a trail. It's very rare, like in the Vegas shooting, where there's almost nothing there and it's a vacuum.
So you don't think the investigation is different, but the crime is different. The perpetrator is different.
Yeah, I mean, this guy seems to fit the pattern of people who go out there and targeted violence, assassinations, school shootings, homicidal maniacs like this who decide to go into church. And we don't know the motive yet, but it appears there's some connection there. It appears that his desire to take out revenge or whatever it may have been on a family member or an in-law, he just uses violence as a way to, show his power. And that's what he did. He took out 20 plus innocent people in his rampage there. But that fits the models we've seen in the past.
Yes. What are the lessons for the rest of us of this?
Tucker, it pains me to say this, but churches are inherently vulnerable places. You have the right to protect yourself. There are wolves out there. There's a big conflict of visions, if I can steal a line from Thomas Sowell here. The left seems to believe that we can somehow legislate the evil out of people's hearts. You won't. Do not be a sheep. If you are a church, if you are a synagogue, you are in a uniquely vulnerable spot. It pains me to say that, but we live in a different time. You have an ingress, an exit, and an entrance point in the back. Therefore, everybody comes out of the same spot. Right. Tucker, where's everybody's attention in church? Ahead. Where's the shooter going to come in? He's going to come in the back. You also have the lack of cover or concealment. There's nowhere to hide. Why? Because people don't hide in church. They have to see what's going on in the altar. There's nowhere to go. It doesn't give me any joy in telling you that, but in 12 years as a Secret Service agent, if you are in a church or a house of worship, you have an obligation now to realize that we live in a different world. It's sad. These are black swan events. But the penalty for being involved in a black swan event like this is death. This has happened multiple times. You have to secure and harden up your location. I'm sorry I had to say that, but it is absolutely true in the times we live in.
Dan Bongino, thanks a lot for that, as always.
Yes, sir.
Voters in Virginia elect a new governor tomorrow. It's been the most widely covered political race of the year and by far the most bitter. Virginia is solidly blue now, and Democrat Ralph Northam has long been expected to win an easy victory in a place where the Republican president is even less popular than he is in the rest of the country. But that is not what has happened. Republican Ed Gillespie has remained surprisingly close in the polls for months. Panicked, the Democratic establishment and their gophers in the national media have done what they always do in a pinch. They make it about race. Remember when Obama and his campaign told us that Bill Clinton was a racist during the 2008 primaries? Remember when the Hillary Clinton campaign said the same thing about Bernie Sanders just last year? When the going gets tough, Democrats charge racism. So naturally, Ed Gillespie has been transformed into Bull Connor for the purposes of this election. Just yesterday, the New York Times ran a strikingly dishonest piece that accused Gillespie of running, quote, a racially tinged divisive campaign. According to the New York Times, Gillespie's sins include attacking the Salvadoran street gang MS-13, opposing sanctuary cities, and criticizing Governor Terry McAuliffe's unilateral decision to restore voting rights to felons in the state. For this, Ed Gillespie is a bigot. Now, it would be amusing if it wasn't so poisonous. Ed Gillespie isn't a racist. If anything, he's too liberal for many Republicans in Virginia. A former corporate lobbyist from New Jersey, Gillespie has establishment views on virtually everything. He's strongly pro-immigration. He supports amnesty for DACA beneficiaries. He's never made race an issue in this campaign. He promised to crack down on MS-13 because it's a deadly criminal force with thousands of members, which, by the way, and not incidentally, targets almost exclusively Salvadoran immigrants. He made an issue at his sanctuary cities because they fuel the rise of MS-13 and they mock America's laws. He made an issue out of felon voting rights because it was a naked political power grab by the Democratic governor. These aren't racial issues except in delusional Acela corridor newsrooms. Don't tell that to Politico, though. Its reporters accuse Gillespie of adopting, quote, racially charged culture war issues for daring to oppose monument vandalism and national anthem protests. Think Progress ran this headline, quote, Gillespie's campaign's final push for votes plays on hatred of black NFL protesters, end quote. Standing up for the national anthem is now white nationalism. The irony is there actually was racial demagoguery in this campaign, a lot of it, but it didn't come from Ed Gillespie or his supporters. In the closing days, supporters of Northam ran an ad suggesting that Ed Gillespie's voters wanted to murder minority kids. That's not a partisan interpretation of it. The ad actually said that. It showed a white man in a pickup truck with a Gillespie sticker trying to run over a bunch of kids, including a little Muslim girl, as they fled for their lives. The New York Times didn't even mention that ad until graph 14 of its hit piece on Gillespie yesterday. The ad got in the way of their storyline, apparently. Like all off-year elections, tomorrow's results will be scrutinized for larger lessons about American politics. You're going to hear people say the vote was a referendum on Trump, and to some extent, that's true, it was. but it will also be a test of the Democratic Party's worst and most dangerous habit, inflaming racial fears to get voters to the polls. Does that tactic still work? Let's hope not. We'll find out tomorrow. Juan Williams co-hosts The Five right here on Fox, and he joins us tonight. Hey, Juan.
Hey, how are you, Tucker?
So, you know Ed Gillespie. Everyone in Washington knows Ed Gillespie. And whatever you think of his politics, he's hardly a bigot. He's a moderate guy politically and by temperament. And so I just look at this with my jaw open and think, if they're turning Ed Gillespie into a bigot for attacking MS-13, then, like, the word has no meaning anymore. That's my reaction to it.
Well, you know, I like Ed Gillespie a lot. I knew him when he was chair of the Republican National Committee, and he was always a guy about inclusion and outreach to minorities. He saw that as the future of the party. But I must say that I was listening to you, I was thinking to myself, I think Ed has found himself in a tight spot after a primary race in which he was running against Corey Stewart, who was Donald Trump's campaign manager in Virginia. And Stewart ran a campaign that was all about the Confederate statues and keeping them in place. He made a very strong populist and at times racial appeal that brought him almost, I think it was less than 2 points, with close to Ed Gillespie in that primary race for the nomination. And now Ed has done things like what you have just laid out, the NFL players kneeling, the Confederate statues, and I think most of all, somehow conflating MS-13 with immigration, and started those ads in the southwestern part of the state, you know, down in Roanoke and the more rural
I don't
areas.
Understand what you mean. I mean, I guess I would just make 2 points. One, MS-13 is a real thing. It's an actual phenomenon.
It's not the state. Well, it's not as big a threat as you would think by seeing the commercials.
Do you know who it's a threat to, though? Is Salvadoran immigrants.
I agree with you.
All the way to El Salvador to report on this.
That's fine, but that's not who the ads are aimed at. No, the ads are stirring up white anger.
But you don't need to be white to be angry about the fact that our immigration policy has allowed a lot of people to come here illegally and join street gangs.
I agree with you.
And so there's nothing, and by the way, their victims are immigrants. So, like, I don't know, why is that racist to say that? It's true.
No. It's not. You're right. There's a real issue, especially, I mean, these people kill each other, so they're Salvadorans killing Salvadorans. But it ties into, and this goes back to the Trump playbook, which is immigration is a threat. It's perceived as a threat by lots of working class white voters. I think you've spoken to me about this. And so what it does is, by playing this up in an ad, it stirs that base that wasn't going to go to the Ed Gillespie you described as a moderate Republican.
Well, look, I disagree with Ed Gillespie's views on immigration very strongly.
Okay.
So, but because I'm way to the right of him in immigration, because it actually is a threat. It's a great thing in other ways, but in some ways it is a threat. And MS-13 is one manifestation of that. It's real, and there's nothing racist about saying that. And if we make that off limits, if we call people names for telling the truth, then we can't have an honest conversation about it.
Oh, no, I want an honest conversation, but I'm telling you, it's not a threat to the extent that it would become the major issue in the race for governor of Virginia, unless you are playing it in order to stir up and turn out your voters, which is what Ed has done.
Okay,
he is following the Corey Stewart, Donald Trump playbook.
They ran an ad, his opponents, accusing him and his voters of wanting to murder children with a pickup truck. No, that's literally true, and that's not like my spin on it. I mean, that's what. Have you seen the spot? Of course.
Of course.
And yet somehow Ed Gillespie, who is a victim of that ad, he's the bigot for some reason because he doesn't like MS-13. Do you see why this is actually insane? And it's making people vote for Ed Gillespie. The attacks on Gillespie are so unfair that I think a lot of people who wouldn't vote for Gillespie are thinking, you know what, this is nutty, and I'm voting for Gillespie to show that I don't like it.
No, I think the dynamic, the political dynamic, is one that Steve Bannon, you know, the Trump political advisor of old now, said, you know, this is the playbook. This is how Ed Gillespie has gotten himself back in the race, by highlighting things like MS-13 and immigration.
Wait, hold on.
It is a political play to a racial base, Tucker.
But they accused him of wanting to murder minority children. I mean, if that's not racial demagoguery, is that not racial demagoguery? I mean, like, what's the definition of it if that isn't?
Let me just tell you, this is not racial demagoguery. When you go into Latino communities and Muslim communities and see the anxiety that has been stirred by the kind of appeals that came from Trump, and now Corey
but not
Stewart.
by this ad saying actually they want to murder your children with a pickup truck. That doesn't heighten anxiety, though.
It's a nightmare of anxiety
so let's confirm
that's depicted
it is true,
in the
so they'll
ad.
vote for us. I get it.
Well,
people should be ashamed of that. I think that ad. And
I think playing racial politics is unnecessary, but I don't think you can deny that that's what's going on in this campaign.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I just think you know what I think. Juan, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Tucker.
Donna Brazile has exposed massive and real misconduct by the Democratic Party. She's a Democrat. She ran the Democratic Party, actually. So why are the media trying to downplay her story? It's a fascinating tale of establishment collusion, and we'll tell it to you with a former Hillary Clinton advisor. Next. People say the media are liberal, and obviously they are, but that's not the whole story. More than anything, the national media are part of the establishment. They went to the same schools as the establishment. They share the same values. They're basically the same people. If you want evidence of this, look no further than the controversy over Donna Brazile's new book. Brazile once ran the DNC. So when she says the Democratic Party worked hard to steal the election from Bernie Sanders, you can't exactly dismiss her as a partisan or a kook. And yet that's exactly what many in the establishment press have tried to do for several days. According to highly informed sources we spoke to, highly informed, top management at CNN directed its employees to undermine Brazile's credibility. Anchors and producers there were vocally offended, many of them, by Brazile's attacks on their friends, the Clintons. If you've been watching that channel, you may have noticed CNN's anchors suggesting that Donna Brazile cannot be trusted precisely because she took part in efforts to rig the primaries for Clinton. Watch.
She's the one who, through somebody who doesn't work at CNN, got access to one town hall question and sent an email, which we know from WikiLeaks, to someone in the Clinton campaign to give them a town hall question, which is completely unethical. She wasn't doing that for Bernie Sanders.
Do you take her at her word, Sam, given the fact that she lied about that CNN debate and giving those questions to Hillary Clinton ahead of time?
It's unbelievable. In retrospect, they're so obviously talking points. Glad to know that. But CNN's not alone, by the way. Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept wrote a great piece the other day in which he pointed out that journalists have repeatedly spread misleading stories designed to exonerate the behavior of Hillary Clinton and the DNC. NBC News published a story claiming the Clinton-DNC agreement only applied to the general election. If they'd simply read the agreement, they would have seen that's false. It applied to both. That claim was quickly, though, repeated by MSNBC, The Hill, and others. Again, it was false. Establishment journalists also claimed that Sanders signed the very same agreement that Hillary Clinton did. That's false, too. The media loves a scandal, but in this case, they can't seem to downplay this one fast enough. Donna Brazile isn't backing down, though. Watch this.
For those who are telling me to shut up, they told Hillary that a couple of months ago. You know what I tell them? Go to hell. I'm going to tell my story.
Donna Brazile is going to join us on this show on Wednesday with her side of all of this. Meanwhile, Richard Goodstein advised Hillary Clinton on both her presidential campaigns, and he is brave enough to join us in studio.
Darn right.
So in her book, and again, we're having her Wednesday, I can't wait to hear about this, but she says that she experienced sexism on the Hillary campaign. She wasn't taken seriously because she was a woman. And it raises the obvious question, which is, do you think the Democratic Party can handle strong women like Donna Brazile?
So I don't know whether Donna Brazile is a kook, but what she says is kooky in the book and what she's been saying on TV. Let me give you an example.
Wait, I don't know why. Hold on. I thought the basic precept of liberalism is when a woman says she was mistreated for being a woman, that you take her seriously. You don't dismiss her as, quote, a kook or a crazy person.
In her book...
Am I the feminist here?
In her book, she says that sometimes men are not able to deal with women. This is being laid at the feet of people who worked for Hillary Clinton. I mean, the fact is, these are people... Hillary Clinton was accused of only having women work for her when she was in the Senate.
So you're dismissing her claim? You're dismissing her claim of sexism because why? Because Hillary Clinton's campaign...
I think she's got a distorted view of things.
She's crazy. She's another crazy woman.
I'm saying...
I get it. The crazy woman defense.
I'm saying she's
I've heard this before.
Because this is sort of justifiably nuts. The political director, the communications director, the political director, the communications director, the digital director, you could go on and on and on, were women for Hillary. So the notion that somehow the Hillary Clinton campaign couldn't countenance a strong woman is crazy.
I think the campaign man wasn't Robbie Mook, was a man. And look, all I'm saying is the Democratic Party has told me all my life that when a woman says she faces sexism, you're not allowed to dismiss her as crazy, or it's that time of the month, or any kind of insulting suggestion that she doesn't have her full wits about her. You have to take her seriously. And I do take Donna Brazile seriously. Here you are, the Democrats, saying she's just another crazy woman.
Here's the problem, I think, that Donna Brazile should have known better. Any presidential candidate, this is true on the Republican side and Democratic, takes over the national party. John McCain did that, put Frank Donatelli into the RNC. Right. And the Democrats do the same. That goes back decades, okay? Somehow or other, she acted offended as if somehow they were taking it out on her when they wanted to make decisions as opposed to her. So she's putting this spin about whether it's sexism or whatever, this whole, this nonsense that she spit out about somehow or other because of her race or whatnot. It really is, I wonder.
Okay, good. So just tell me, as someone who's kind of following along, sort of watching as our culture changes really fast, and I'm writing this down because I want to keep this for future reference. When are the times when I can just dismiss allegations of racism and sexism with the back of my hand and call them nonsense, as you just did? When am I allowed to do that?
When there's evidence to the contrary. And with the evidence here is, again, every single person who was, not everyone, so many people at the top of the heap. For the campaign. Yeah, but the fact
and there were lots of men on that campaign.
Up and down. If you look at that campaign, it was uniquely kind of occupied by very powerful senior women. And again, what Donna Brazile was taking personally, look, again, she was Al Gore's campaign manager, okay? So she didn't use Bill Clinton. There's a problem there, but it's not something that was Hillary Clinton's doing.
Boy, you're very, very certain of this. It's interesting. I'm going to, if I'm ever accused of something bad, I'm going to use your technique, which is, that's absurd. She's got to be crazy.
Well, except the evidence.
She's crazy.
I'm not saying she's crazy. I'm saying she's wrong.
You said she was a kook.
I'm saying what she's saying sounds crazy because it is demonstrably disproved.
Yeah, it hasn't actually been disproved, and you're making me even more anxious to speak to her directly. Really quickly, though, part of what's going on here is that the Clintons are losing control of the Democratic Party. It's not their party. The base doesn't agree with them on key issues. Clintons may be actually right on some of those issues from my perspective, but whatever. But the truth is, they're not going gently into that good night. Their time is over. It's been eclipsed. And these are kind of the last gasps of this political aristocracy that has been in power for 25 years. Isn't that what kind of is going on?
Well, I will say there is a tug of war going on within the Democratic Party between the Sanders and Warren wing and the wing that frankly has won presidential campaigns. Now, there's this talk about Democrats being in disarray.
Is Elizabeth Warren a kook, by the way?
She's not a kook. I have great regard for her.
Her allegations of sexism just crazy, too?
I think what she said about the things being rigged is flat out wrong. And in fact, even Donna Brazile yesterday on the Stephanopoulos show said things were not rigged.
Okay.
So that's
crazy. God, I'm never going to use that, but, that's just me. Richard, great to see you.
Thanks.
You're a brave man. Our interview with Ivanka Trump and Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, is minutes away. Coming up. Out at the Reagan Library in California. She just landed from Japan, and we talked tax policy. Here's a preview of the conversation.
We need to enable middle-income families to be able to invest in early childhood education and childcare, which disproportionately impacts women. The fact that the average American family spends almost 30% of pre-tax income on the cost of childcare. So the cost of childcare has gone through the roof, and families just can't afford it. So women are disproportionately leaving the workforce.
It actually got kind of interesting from there. We'll have more from that interview in just a minute. She's not the only person we spoke to when we were out there, though. We also sit down with the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, to talk about the administration's plan to overhaul the U.S. tax code. Here's part of it. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I think it's fair to say the last election was an expression of anxiety on the part of the American middle class. And the administration has said repeatedly they recognize that. How does this plan address the concerns of the American middle class?
I think, as you know, President Trump from day one has been very focused on the economy and absolutely convinced that we can get back to sustained economic growth of 3% GDP or higher. And the tax plan is center stage of his economic plan. So this is all about middle-income tax cuts, cutting business taxes, and making U.S. business competitive with the rest of the world.
So if you're a Trump voter and you're making $59,000 median income. What does this mean for you?
You're going to see at least several $100s of a tax cut, and that's what you're going to see, money in your pocket.
So to your critics who say, well, wait a second, corporations are seeing a much larger tax cut. Why is that fair when corporate profits are very high and middle-class income is stagnant? What do you say?
Tucker, 70% of the burden of corporate taxes are borne by the worker. So the reason why we're cutting corporate taxes is so that American business can be competitive. Right now, we have one of the highest tax rates in the world, and that's why jobs are going overseas. So this is about bringing back trillions of dollars that are offshore and making business competitive. That's why we call it Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
So if businesses profit more, workers benefit. That's your argument. But businesses are doing well now. Why aren't wages keeping pace with corporate profits?
Well, again, businesses are doing well. The stock market's doing well. So for rich people, it's been a great 8 years. But for the average American worker, they haven't seen their wages increase. So this is about making U.S. business competitive, having more jobs here, and giving wage increases to workers.
But there's the counter case that corporate profits have been rising, but wages have not been. That's puzzling to people watching.
Well, they've been rising some, but they haven't been rising proportionate with the stock market. And this is going to be about creating more earnings, about, more important, bringing back capital. So we're going to encourage companies to bring back trillions of dollars that will be invested here to have new jobs, new factories, new buildings, new manufacturing.
How much do you expect to come back?
$3 trillion at least. The president thinks it could be 4 or 5.
This bill, as written, would increase the number of people who don't pay federal taxes and basically make the government more reliant on a smaller number of people carrying the whole burden. Does that make you uncomfortable?
It doesn't. I mean, one of the things the president has said continuously, this is not about tax cuts for rich people. This is about tax cuts for the middle class. And for working Americans, we're going to raise the standard deduction to $24,000 for families. Here we are at the Reagan Library. There's no better place to have tribute to what was done 31 years ago with President Reagan. You know, the President Trump's tax reform will be even bigger.
So the president during the campaign said repeatedly that he was going to give, quote, a haircut to the private equity people and the hedge fund managers by doing away with what is called the carried interest loophole, which allows people to take salary and get taxed at the investment rate, which is almost half. That is still in there. This bill allows that to continue. Why?
I'm sure that's one of the issues will be debated as it gets through the House and as it gets to the Senate, and we'll be working with both parties on.
You're going to push on that?
We are.
Not every group in D.C. loves the plan, and one of the most upset are the realtors and the home builders who are mad about the deductions you'll be eliminating for mortgage interest.
We've preserved in the House version, you know, a $500,000 mortgage that you can deduct the interest. That's an awfully big home in mostly every single part of this country. We're cutting out lots of loopholes throughout the whole tax plan. So there will be people who don't like bits and pieces, but people understand this is a pass-fail exercise. It's critical to the economy, and we're going to get it done.
Mr. Secretary, thank you.
Thank you.
A horrifying epidemic spreading in Africa and killing people. What is it? Could it come here quickly? We'll give you details on that with a physician who's following it next. Well, parts of Africa are seeing a deadly outbreak of a disease called monkeypox. It's been around for a while, and it pops up occasionally in a big way right now. The disease is incurable. It could reach this country before we know it's coming. It's got a long incubation period of about 16 days. What's the nature of the threat, and is it one to this country? Dr. Ashini Raj is an associate professor of medicine at NYU Langone Health, which is a terrific place, and she joins us tonight. Doctor, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
So if it takes a couple of weeks for a person infected with monkeypox to show symptoms, that suggests you could have people coming over here with it, and then they get sick from it in the United States. What happens then? How contagious is it? What are the effects?
Well, the good news is it's not very easily spread between person to person. It's actually more easily spread from a wild animal to a person. But it can be spread amongst human beings, and that's usually through respiratory droplets, but very close contact. So a caregiver of someone who's sick with this virus, that's the kind of person who'd be more prone to get it. But it's still concerning because, as you said, it can be fatal in up to 10% of cases. That's a pretty deadly kind of virus.
Is there any kind of defense against it?
There's no treatment for it. Now, it is similar to smallpox. So the smallpox vaccine does offer some protection against the monkeypox. However, it's not specifically designed for it, and there is no specific treatment for it other than supportive care. Occasionally, a general antiviral medication can be seen and can be given in very severe cases, but it doesn't always work.
Huh. So if you had an outbreak in this country with obviously the most advanced medical care in the world, do you think you'd still see a 10% fatality rate?
I mean, the range is between 2 to 10% in terms of fatality, and because our care is so great in this country, we would hope to be closer to the 1 or 2% level. But again, there is no actual cure for it. So certainly immunocompromised people, young children would be more prone to really succumbing to this virus. So it still could be very deadly even in this country, which is why it's so important that scientists from this country are over in Africa trying to really get a better handle on what causes it, how is it transmitted, because we can't just sort of keep our head in the sand and think it's over there, it's far away. As you said, we're a global society now. Anything can come here in a matter of a couple days.
As with so many diseases.
That's right.
Dr. Rush, thank you very much for your perspective.
Thank you.
Well, is it time to get real about tightening travel restrictions from countries where this outbreak is occurring and the United States? David Teferi is a former State Department official, and he joins us tonight. David, I'm against overreacting to anything, including this. But I also notice a certain overreaction on the other side, and I've seen with a bunch of other outbreaks of illness over the years where the globalists in our midst basically make the case it's mean to protect United States citizens from potential outbreaks of disease in this country. Therefore, we can't meaningfully screen people coming to our country because it's mean. Would you take that position in this case?
Well, monkeypox is a scary disease, as was Ebola, and we should be doing everything we can to prevent people from getting it here and to screen people who come here so that we make sure it isn't brought here. Now, it's important to note that the Immigration and Nationality Act already requires medical screening for refugees and other immigrants who come here. They have to be screened in their country of origin if they imply in their country of origin, or if they make it here without being screened, they have to be screened here before their immigration status is changed. That's appropriate. Now look at how we dealt with Ebola, which ultimately we dealt with it quite well, and we ended up preventing it from having an outbreak here in the U.S. The way we did that is we screened people at the airport to determine where they came from, if they were in Africa, and if they came from countries where Ebola was present, they could possibly be quarantined. That was the appropriate way to deal with Ebola, and I would say this is the right way to deal with monkeypox.
Ebola is not actually very contagious. If you keep sanitary conditions, you don't have a lot of body fluids flying around, you're probably not going to get Ebola. And there's never been an Ebola outbreak in the West because of that. This, as you just heard the doctor say, can be spread through sneezing. So it's a totally different thing, actually. And I guess my question is theoretical. I'm not calling for any kind of quarantine of visitors here. But theoretically, if you had a country with a real outbreak of this in Central Africa, for example, why wouldn't you, in the interest of our population, say we're not taking anybody from that country until this dies down?
Well, if the only way to protect America was to ban people from coming from that country, that would be appropriate. But we have to look at lesser measures first.
Why?
Because if there are lesser measures that would allow not to have a ban but still protect America, then that's what you do.
Why would we do that? I mean, look, if you go, look, and I'm not arguing for this in this case, but I'm just saying theoretically, and it's meaningful because there are a lot of diseases out there that could come here for real. This is a real thing.
Correct.
If your only real interest was protecting American citizens, which is, of course, not the real interest of our elites, as we both know, but let's say it was. Let's say you were following the Constitution and just looking out for your people as you're supposed to. You don't owe anybody from any country other than this one anything. So why would you let a single person from that country in here? Because any person represents some risk. Why would you do that to your people?
Well, Tucker, you have to look at the science. If a person truly poses a risk because of the country that they're coming from, and there's no way to mitigate that risk in a way to protect American people, then yes, we should ban them. But we should remember we are a country of immigrants. Thanksgiving is coming up in 2 weeks.
Oh, so
the Pilgrims were immigrants.
That's more important.
No, it's not more important. But it is an important policy that we allow immigration, that we do encourage immigration, that we are a beacon of hope for people who come from
no normal person would apply this.
countries. And as I said,
no person would have that standard with his own children. You wouldn't say, I want to mitigate the risk. You say, no, I want to eliminate the risk because I love them. They're my kids. I care about them. My job is to protect them. But our leaders don't feel that way about us. They're like, oh, I'll mitigate it. They'll probably be fine. Maybe not totally fine. Fine enough for you. That's what they're saying.
Well, you have to look at each disease when it comes up, and you have to deal with it based on the science. As I said, if the only way to protect America is to ban people from a particular country, then we should do that. It's not what we had to do with Ebola. We did quarantine. That was enough.
Look,
and it's also important to remember that one of the ways we solved Ebola is by bringing some people who were infected back here so they can get the great medical treatment that we have here in the U.S. in order to help solve Ebola.
Our duty. We're out of time. David, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Deeply revealing as always. So an interview with first daughter Ivanka Trump after the break. Ivanka Trump cut out of her father's Asia trip early to come back and make the case for the Republican Party's tax reform plan. She sat down with us yesterday out in Simi Valley, California at the Reagan Library to tell us about that, as well as to talk about the plight of American women compared to that of men. Here's part of our conversation. Watch. You cut the Asia trip short, you're part of it, to come back to carry the banner for this bill. Why?
Yes, I was in Japan at the invitation of Prime Minister Abe to speak about women's participation in the workforce, which is a critical issue to the growth of the Japanese economy, but also something we're very focused on in our administration as well. But I decided not to go on because ultimately tax reform is central to the administration's plans over the coming months, and it's critically important that we get it done, and we believe we can get it done. So I decided not to meet up and continue the trip with the president.
So if I ran into you
here
in an elevator and we had like 2 floors for you to make your pitch for the tax plan, what would it be?
Well, there's a dual focus, and that's providing much-needed tax relief to middle-income families and cutting taxes generally so that our businesses can be competitive and thrive in a modern economy and in a global world where there's tremendous competition. And our tax plan accomplishes both of those things.
It's a pretty good pitch.
Oh, well, thank you.
So you said that
and simplification. We like simplification, so three.
You were speaking to the Japanese about the need for further workforce participation for women, and that's consistent with the theme that you've been on top of since the beginning of the administration. I've got 3 daughters and a son, so I'm paying attention to the numbers on this, and it seems like in this country anyway, the crisis is among boys, not girls. Girls graduate from college at much higher numbers. They die from drug ODs at much lower rates, same with suicide. The majority of managers are women. It really seems like the problem is not women in the United States, and I wonder if you think that's a wrong analysis, or...
I do. I think there are certainly the problems you noted are broader than economic problems.
Yes.
So those may be individual to boys, but while women comprise 47% of the workforce, we are very underrepresented in fields that will be critically important when you think about the jobs of the future. So you look at the technology industry, we represent 21% of people in tech. That's a problem when you think about where jobs will be created going forward. We're 13% of engineers, so we have to change that. And I think that our tax plan takes a big step in terms of helping the American family with the high cost of raising children. The fact that the average American family spends almost 30% of pre-tax income on the cost of childcare. So the cost of childcare has gone through the roof, and families just can't afford it. So women are disproportionately leaving the workforce. So there are unique challenges, but I think our tax plan is very helpful towards providing middle-income relief so that families can thrive. An expansion of the child tax credit, maintaining the child independent care credit as part of tax reform, doubling the standard deduction. So really, it's the central theme is middle-income Americans and supporting them. We spend less than any country in the developed world on children between the ages of 0 and 5. It's just a fact. We don't invest enough resources.
Meaning the government spends less?
Meaning as a society, yes, early childhood education. Well, no, we as families have a very...
spend a lot.
But no, but as a government in terms of, schooling starts at the age of 5.
Right.
There's not a lot of support for families in those early years. undeniably, it's very expensive to raise children. That's if you're a stay-at-home parent who's investing in potentially after-school activities, mommy and me classes, food, and whatever it is that they think is the best investment to help their family and their children.
Last question. Are you worried that the Senate will change it in ways that make it less effective or even unacceptable?
I'm optimistic that the Senate takes what's been created and actually enhances it. And, you know, I think that's a great opportunity.
Thanks very much, Ivanka Trump.
Thank you.
Tomorrow I'll post both our full interviews with Ivanka Trump and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin on FoxNews.com. We got an announcement about the next 2 nights of the show, by the way, and that's next. We'll be right back. Tomorrow night, we'll be covering the elections in Virginia and New Jersey. The Virginia race is particularly interesting. We've got access to all new exit polls at Fox. We'll be tracking those races in real time. Really interesting. Be sure to tune in Wednesday, by the way. We're going to talk to Donna Brazile about the attacks on her and how she says the DNC rigged the primary last year for Hillary Clinton. Whoa. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night, 8 o'clock, the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and especially